Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction. In the fields of bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning. Death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed mind.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia on the National Community Radio Satellite. Listen to the Anarchist World This Week, Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. Listen to analysis of local, national, international events. Listen to analysis you'll never hear anywhere else.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. Welcome to all our listeners at 2MIA in Griffith, 2RRR in Gladesville, New South Wales, Radio N in Yeppoon, Queensland, 4NSA from Noosa Heads in Queensland, Huon FM in Tasmania, 2XX from Canberra, obviously 3CR in Melbourne, from which this radio program comes from, 3UGE from Alexandria in Victoria, 4NSA from Noosa Heads in Queensland, 5UV from Adelaide, South Australia, 7RGY from Geefston, Tasmania, 8CCC from Alice Springs in the ACT. So, welcome to all our listeners across the country. As I said before, this program comes to you from the studios of 3CR in Melbourne. My name's Joseph Toscano. The program is broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. If you're listening to this program somewhere in Australia and you've got a local community radio station, there's a strong possibility there may be a member of the Community Radio Network. Check with your local community radio station, see if they're happy to broadcast the Anarchist World this week, because, you know, we're tame paper tigers. Let's be realistic. Anarchism is an exceptionally conservative concept. It really is. Anarchos without rulers. It's an ideology, a philosophy, a practical way of organising. It's about people organising their lives without rulers. Now, I'm sure you're sick and tired when you turn on the news, go on the net, whatever you do to, get your rocks off, as far as current affairs is concerned, that it's all about leaders here and leaders there and rulers telling people what to do. And if you're sick and tired of that and you think that people themselves have the capacity to organise themselves in a federal system based on delegation, anarchos without rulers, well, whether you believe it or not, you're an anarchist. So what's so radical about the people involved in the decision making that decision? What's so radical about holding wealth in common so everybody can share the common wealth? We do live in the Commonwealth of Australia, you may have forgotten, and obviously that concept comes from the Commonwealth, which was created when Charles I head rolled down the aisles. I think it was in the 17th century. So, anarchism, simple. Now today, there's a few things I want to chat. I don't think the word discuss. I think you need two people to discuss things, but I want to chat about just a few things. Nothing particularly radical, but important things in my opinion. Now, I know that a lot of people think that what's happening in Victoria regarding signing a treaty or a number of treaties with this with the state's Indigenous population is a world beater. But it's all going well. Well, to me, the Victorian government has corporatised, that's right, that horrible word, the treaty process. Now, although there's a First Peoples Assembly and the Yoorook Justice Commission, it's interesting to see that the state government is playing favourites. Currently, of the 40 original language groups which existed in the state of Victoria, there are 11 registered Aboriginal parties. We call them RAPs, Registered Aboriginal Parties. So what is a registered Aboriginal party? A registered Aboriginal party is a group that is recognised by the state government for responsibility in a specific area. And the beauty of being a registered Aboriginal party, and remember there's only 11 in Victoria of the 40 distinct language groups, a registered Aboriginal party has all the say in dealings with government in their area, in these areas. All the say. They have a monopoly. So in many regards, registered Aboriginal parties are basically monopolies who have been given a tick by the state government to represent. Now, not only do we have the 11 registered Aboriginal parties, but we have registered Aboriginal parties which have been given a tick by the state government against the advice of their own department. And I'll repeat that again. We have registered Aboriginal parties which have been given a tick by the state government, so they've got sole say in dealings with government in these areas. When I talk about government, I'm not just talking about state government, but I'm talking about local government, because local governments are creatures of state government and they have to follow the state government perspective. For example, and I'm not going to name any particular groups at this particular point in time, but I'll give you an example. A particular group which was recognised by a number of councils in the Melbourne region, which is currently going through the federal court in order to overturn the state government decision, because let's not forget, the 1967 referendum gave the federal government the power to intervene in matters regarding this country's First Nations people. And that's what the referendum was about. It wasn't about the right to vote. It was about the Commonwealth government taking the power from the states, which were the bodies which were a brake on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander advancement, in inverted commas. So there are a number of federal cases now in Victoria by Aboriginal parties that have been removed or not registered by the state government. So who is the state government registering? They are basically registering organisations, that's right, organisations which follow their dictate. They're excluding the more radical elements of the Aboriginal community in Victoria, because obviously the more radical element, it's much more difficult to negotiate with them because of the extent of the things that they actually want in return as far as to be incorporated in a treaty. So it's not all negative, it's positive. Because although the Victorian state government has these registered Aboriginal parties and an assembly, which is to a large degree is dominated by the registered Aboriginal parties, and a Justice Commission, which again is dominated by these registered Aboriginal parties, other parties in Victoria have mobilised, and although it's a very expensive undertaking, sometimes it can take up to millions of dollars, they are fighting back these state government decisions through the federal courts. So I think it's important that when we hear people talking about treaty or treaties in Victoria, that we understand what is going on behind the scenes. It's very important. Because if we don't understand what's going on behind the scenes, we may find ourselves with a treaty with the registered Aboriginal parties, but everybody else in the community, in the Aboriginal community in the state of Victoria, is excluded, because once you're a registered Aboriginal party, you have all the say in dealings with government at the local and state level. That's right. For example, I was mentioning before, a particular group I'm familiar with, they'd had a good relationship with local councils for 20 to 30 years. The state government made a decision regarding who would represent that area, and all of a sudden the local council is no longer able to deal with these particular groups. End of story. And that's what it's like. And no wonder there is so much dissatisfaction regarding the current treaty process. You cannot have a treaty process that excludes people who show that they have descendancy from the original inhabitants. And this is happening for one very good reason. Because if you can register Aboriginal parties that are dependent on government support financially to keep their infrastructure functioning, it means you can actually control the nature of the treaty process. Now, on the 20th of January is the Tunnerminnerwait Maulboyheenner Commemoration. Now, it's very interesting that this year we were asked by a third party to invite a commissioner from the Yoorook Justice Commission to speak at the function. And it makes sense. I mean, it's a Justice Commission. It's looking at what happened during the colonisation process. And you need to understand that we did the hard work. That's right, the Anarchist Media Institute through the Tunnerminnerwait Maulboyheenner Commemoration Committee, which consisted of anarchists. And we struggled for over 10 years to have a significant monument erected by the Melbourne City Council to mark that event. This is a pivotal event in Australian history, and I'll tell you why it's a pivotal event in Australian history. Because before 1842, the massacres which occurred clandestinely. People were pushed off their lands, they were butchered, they were poisoned, they had disease spread. But this was when five people who had been sent from Flinders Island, the remnants of the Tasmanian population, to Victoria in 1841 under Mr. Robinson to civilise the Victorian blacks. That five took to the hills, and what I'm talking about is the Dandenong Ranges and Mornington Peninsula in 1841, and began a guerrilla struggle against the authorities, which caused consternation, which saw hundreds of settlers flock back into Melbourne for protection. Five people: Tunnerminnerwait, Maulboyheenner, Truganini, Planobina, and Putirana. Five. After a successful campaign that lasted over 8 weeks, they were eventually captured, tried, and the two men, Tunnerminnerwait and Maulboyheenner, was found by the Supreme Court judge, Judge Willis, to be guilty of insurrection, to be guilty of murder, to be guilty of fighting back. And they were hung on the 20th of January 1842, the first people hung in the state of Victoria. That's right, 1842. So these were judicial executions for people resisting colonisation, which was carried out by the state. These weren't extrajudicial massacres. These were judicial executions. And for over 10 years we fought for the creation of a significant monument to the frontier wars in Melbourne. And this monument was opened in 2016. And on the 20th of January, we continue to hold a commemoration. And the first hour of the commemoration is broadcast from midday to 1 p.m. on Community Radio 3CR, and you can access that by going to 3cr.org.au. That's 12 to 1. That's next Friday, the 20th of January. Now, as I said before, we've got the runs on the board. We did the hard work. We didn't beg or beseech. We had resistance from all quarters, including sections of the Aboriginal community, as well as the Murdoch press and the usual conservative hacks that you've got to deal with when you've got a bit of a radical agenda in this country. But we won through for our persistence. And of the 7 original members of the Tunnerminnerwait Maulboyheenner Commemoration Committee, 4 have died. And that's my late wife Ellen Jose, Joy French, Bill French, and Rick Simpson. There's only 3 of us left of that original committee. So when I was asked to send an invitation to the Yoorook, and my apologies for the pronunciation, Justice Commission, I thought, well, why not? So we sent off an invitation and we got this long letter asking us who's going to speak, how long they're going to speak, what this is, blah, 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 which we filled out dutifully, sent it off, and guess what? The Yoorook Justice Commissioners, one of them, just one, is not available to spend an hour on Friday, the 20th of January, at the commemoration. So you make of it what you will. Make of it what you will. And again, this highlights the nature of this treaty process. This highlights its nature. This is the situation we find ourselves in the 21st century. Now, a lot of people are asking me, what do you think of the referendum, which will be held within the next 9 to 12 months regarding a voice to Parliament? And I say, well, I support it. I'll tell you why I support it. Now, obviously, the more conservative and reactionary forces in Australian society, which we've seen with the National Party and we've seen with the Liberal Party, which is still involved in their little culture wars, which even deny the fact that the country was colonised in the most brutal fashion, who remembered that they fought tooth and nail against the Mabo decision in 1992, and they have fought tooth and nail against the Wick decision and a number of other High Court decisions which have given Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander rights to land and sea. And they introduced legislation to water down the decision to such an extent that traditional owners don't even have the power to block mining on their land. They only have the power to negotiate during a fixed period. And even then, in many cases, not even receiving the royalties which they're demanded. So why do I support it? Well, the first thing I support it is because of the Uluru statement in 2017. This was based on delegation. Delegates were sent from across Australia, from Australia's First Nations communities to Uluru. And they wanted 3 things. They wanted a voice to Parliament, they wanted a Truth Commission, and they wanted discussion towards treaty. Reasonable things. So why a referendum? Well, it's simple. The last time the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community had a voice to Parliament, and we've had it in the past, it was called ATSIC. Local communities would elect representatives to provide a voice to Parliament. Now, when the federal when the Howard government took over, they abolished ATSIC. And the thing about governments at the state and especially at the federal level is they give, they take away. The whole point of an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander or a First Nations voice to Parliament is to have a voice, but to have that voice incorporated in the Australian Constitution so future governments cannot abolish that voice to Parliament without first going to the Australian people. Now, obviously, the National Party and the Liberal Party will be pushing the line that the voice to Parliament is some type of opposition or dual power situation, that they will have power to dictate to the Australian Parliament what legislation will be. And now, obviously, this is not the voice to Parliament. When you have a referendum, and if the people support that referendum, government then has to create legislation to give that decision life. The government, the opposition, asking for the nuts and bolts to be created before the referendum highlights what they are doing in terms of causing consternation. And that's the key, causing consternation amongst the Australian people regarding a particularly mild, reformist proposal. And that proposal is to have a First Nations voice to Parliament which advises Parliament regarding Aboriginal and Torres Strait matters. It's not that they've got the power to make legislation. It's not that they're an alternative to the federal government or the House of Representatives and the Senate. It's a simple voice. As people say, no decisions without my consent. All right? Simple. Nothing radical about it. So, school holidays aren't finished. So if you're around on the 20th of January, I encourage you to join us at the Tunnerminnerwait and Maulboyheenner Commemoration. The great thing about the Tunnerminnerwait and Maulboyheenner Commemoration Committee and all the people that have appeared over the years is we have never paid 1 cent to anybody. And the people that come, like Janet Galpin from the Boonwurrung Foundation to do the Welcome to Country, come freely. They don't require payment. And it's the same with all the other guest speakers, anybody who turns up and anybody who's been involved at committee level. Unfortunately, we are now seeing many of the things that we have for years riled against, private investment for private profit, become a significant feature of a lot of commemorations. I can understand if it's something official. But again, there are many grassroots activist groups which can't afford to pay for a welcome to country, but do a lot of important work, grassroots work, in terms of promoting these ideas. So, if you're in Melbourne on the 20th of January, don't have to ring anybody up, you don't have to book, just turn up, 20th of January. We do start at midday exactly, because the program is broadcast on Community Radio 3CR. Les Thomas will be performing. He'll be doing his very famous Tunnerminnerwait and Maulboyheenner song, which he wrote for the commemoration. We'll have other speakers there, including Janet Galpin, Rowan Leppard from the Melbourne City Council. Usually we find that the the number of guests we invite, the number of rejections we get is quite extraordinary. But that's the nature of what happens if you speak the truth. As George Orwell used to say, speaking the truth is a revolutionary act. You're listening to The Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. Look, if you're listening to this program anywhere in Australia, what we did, you can do. It's simple. What we would like to see, this is the Commemoration Committee, we would like to see the 20th of January be marked around the country as First Nations Freedom Fighters Commemoration Day. We have a Commemoration Day, Anzac Day, to commemorate Australian men and women who've died in war, mainly overseas, fighting other people's wars overseas. Why shouldn't we have a day commemorating the tens of thousands of men, women and children who died resisting colonisation, who continue to resist colonisation? So that's our dream. That's our dream. Whether it happens or not is irrelevant. What is relevant is that the idea is out there and that we'll be promoting that idea. But, once again, Tunnerminnerwait Commemoration Day, Friday the 20th of January, midday to 2 p.m. It starts off at the monument, at the execution site of Tunnerminnerwait and Maulboyheenner, at the corner of Franklin and Victoria Street, Melbourne, just across the way from the Melbourne City, the old Melbourne City Jail. 12 to 1, guest speakers, broadcast of Community Radio 3CR. 1 o'clock we will walk down to what we believe is the Tunnerminnerwait's and Maulboyheenner's burial site at the Queen Victoria Markets, and we'll be asking people to basically express their feelings and why they're there on the day. So there's two parts to it. There's the 1 to 2, there's the 12 to 1 at the monument, and if you are coming, please bring flowers for the monument and also for the burial site, which is obviously under the Queen Victoria Market. There's over 7,000 people buried under the Queen Victoria Market, but that's an interesting story which I'll tell you in a minute. But come along, it's a family-friendly day. It's a great way to get children to understand the colonisation process and what happened in this country. And you're all welcome. You're all invited. You don't have to ring anybody up. Just turn up on the day. Turn up on the day. Let's move on. Now, that little story about the Queen Victoria Market and the 7,000 plus bodies which are buried underneath it. Well, the first Europeans who died, 3 of them were buried on Flagstaff, in Flagstaff Gardens, which was the highest point where people used to see the ships coming through their heads. And then the cemetery was set up where the Queen Victoria Market was, and it was extended later on. But the interesting thing is, when the cemetery was extended, a contract was leased out by the current Victorian government, at that stage colonial government, to have the bodies removed. Now, the contract stated quite clearly, which the very smart entrepreneur noticed, and the entrepreneur said that we will remove the bodies from the Queen Victoria Market site that are under headstones. That meant that the 90% of early Victorians, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, who are buried in the Queen Victoria Markets, their bones were not removed from the Queen Victoria Market because of the contract which said bodies under gravestones. So when you walk around the Queen Victoria Market, think of all those people you're walking over. No, I'm not making this up. It's real. Let's move on. I'm interested in this concept of competitive interests. Now, in Australia today, we have national interests, corporate interests, and public interests. And there's a constant clash between these 3 interests. So what are national interests? Well, national interests are basically the federal government concern, interests of the country as a whole, the interests of the sovereign nation state in terms of maintaining the territorial integrity of the sovereign nation state called Australia. Then we have corporate interests, and corporate interests are basically tied up in the interests of the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication that have been making hay over the last 40 years during the privatisation, globalisation, corporatisation, deregulation era. And then we have public interests. That's the people, you and me, the losers, or the winners, depending on how you like to put it economically. I mean, we're winners as far as life is concerned, losers economically, and losers because things have been ripped away. It's very simple. So you've got national interests, corporate interests, public interests. Now, we have a representative democracy where you've gone through the process over the last 6 months or so of electing a federal government. Now, I actually stood in that election, remarkably unsuccessful, which is to be expected. But, so now we have this situation where you have representatives in Parliament who supposedly look after national interests, the interests of the country as a whole, and look after public interests, the interests of the people they represent. Now, our corporate CEOs, they weren't the ones who elected the people to Parliament. We elected the people to Parliament. We were the ones who gave them a signed blank cheque to make decisions for us for the next, 3 to 4 years. So let's look at the situation. You've got national interests, corporate interests, public interests, and Parliament is supposed to be the arbitrator of what is important and what isn't important. They're the arbitrator. What is important, what isn't important. They make the laws. They make the decisions regarding what happens in society. Now, you notice when I talked about national interests and public interests that I didn't mention corporate interests. Silly me. Silly me. I forgot the most important part of the equation. Corporate interests, the interests of the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange, communication, always trump public interests and almost always trump national interests. And that's why, and I'll repeat it again, we have private charities rattling the tin to raise money to send Australian kids to public schools, which you and I pay for through the taxation. That's why we have over 30,000 charities, registered charities in this country, rattling tins for this and that and this and that. Not that I've got anything against people rattling tins, but I think to myself, we do live in a rich country. You may not be a recipient of that wealth, but we do live in a rich country. An exceptionally rich country, the 20th largest economy on planet Earth. And we still have all these perennial problems. Things like 1 in 6 Australian children living in poverty, 1/3 of the population having to pay rent, 1/3 of the population paying a mortgage for decades to keep a roof over their heads. We have people clamouring to access public hospitals. We have people being denied educational opportunities because of the situation they find themselves in. We have 1/3 of the population who rely on social security benefits to survive, living almost below the poverty line, and some below the poverty line. And we have people basically hostages to a wage system which pays them a pittance in comparison to CEOs of corporations. The list goes on and on. And I think to myself every day, I mean, don't say I'm fixated on it, but, it crosses my mind. National interests, corporate interests, public interests. So why don't public interests, the interests of the population as a whole, trump corporate interests and modify national interests? Well, because power does not lie in Parliament. It lies in that 1% that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange, communication. And why does power lie in their hands? Because they are able to massage the legislative agenda. We could be the richest country on the planet. We could have no children living in poverty. My apologies to Mr. Hawke as he spins in his grave. We could have the best public education system in the world, the best healthcare in the world, the best public housing system in the world. And we could do it through an act of Parliament. We could nationalise this country's major mining exporters. You see, we've been seduced. We've been seduced into believing that we cannot mine our own resources, export them, and share the wealth. We have been told you can't do it. What you need is to give a private corporation, multinational, transnational, whatever you like to, sole power to extract minerals from the earth, irrespective of the First Nations people's opinions and irrespective of the pittance of a royalty which goes to them, and irrespective of the pittance of a royalty which comes to us, and irrespective of the minimal amount of taxation we receive, and irrespective of the escalating costs we have to pay for things like gas and electricity, irrespective, we say, you mine that stuff and you export it and you make billions of dollars, if not tens of billions of dollars for your major shareholders, and your CEOs and they're all their acolytes, take home salaries of millions of dollars and tens of millions of dollars in some cases. And we will, if you're big enough, we'll throw a few coins in your direction. And you can then decide whether you're going to support public housing or public education or the public hospital system. But just let us do our business. And that's the dilemma. Extraordinary. I'd be jailed. If I had a business model, I'd be bankrupt within 24 hours if I had such a business model. If I say, oh, look, I've got this pile of dirt and it's full of minerals. Now, you go out there and, I say to me, mate, you go out there and dig them up and export them and give me 0.2% return. Criminal. So, that's a dilemma. When corporate interests trump public interests and national interests become secondary considerations to corporate interests and corporate profits, we have a major problem, because it means we don't have the resources to actually look after the interests of the people as a whole. And while we continue to believe that the private investment for private profit model is the only model available to human beings to organise their affairs, nothing will change. I'm not saying that the private investment for private profit model hasn't got a role in society. It may have a role in society in giving us terrible cups of coffees or nice cups of coffees. But does it really have a role in society in monopolising essential services. Really? Give me a break. I mean, what we've seen over the last 40 years, or almost 50 years now, is the bargain basement sale of profitable public assets to the private sector because of ideological whims, which has increased the cost to the population. Look at aged care, privatised. Look at the disaster in many areas of aged care. Look at early childhood development, the privatisation of early childhood development. Look at the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Great concept, almost bankrupted and destroyed by the private sector, which is a monopoly on providing services for the National Disability Insurance. Look at the public housing sector. What public housing sector? I was interested to hear that many of the homes, about 80% of the homes that have been destroyed in West Australia in Fitzroy Crossing, are public houses. In Victoria, we don't know what a public house is. And everywhere you go, people talk about affordable housing, community housing, social housing. Gives me the shits. I'll have to change my underwear after this program. Nobody talks about public housing as if it's some type of horrible, evil concept. When it was exposed that 1/4, 25%, of what's left of the public housing sector in Victoria, which is not very many, 60,000 units, are empty at any one time, and many are empty for months and years, and that these sites are being run down. When the Minister for Public Housing was asked to comment, no comment. And that's the beauty of living in this type of society. Headline one day, disappears the next. So it's about time we put public interest before corporate interest. Now, if you are interested in what a tautology. Public interest, corporate interested. If you're interested in joining public interest before corporate interests, well, we're always looking for new members. Go to the website, info@pibci, or just go to pibci.net, pibci.net, pibci.net. You can join online. If you're sick and tired of the political party you're involved in because they don't actually promote the types of concepts and ideas you're involved in, well, I encourage you to join public interest before corporate interests. Let's move on. When is news not news? When we have an ABC expose. Now, I was amused. I shouldn't have been amused. I should have been annoyed, but what's the point of being annoyed when you can be amused? When the Australian Broadcasting Corporation told all of us, stop press, that the Australian government was selling armaments to bodgy countries. Countries with questionable human rights records. Now, this has been going on for decades. For decades, we have been supplying armaments to successive Indonesian governments to ensure that the people of West Papua and before independence East Timor continued to be an occupied country. We've trained their troops in Australia. We give them the anti-terrorist, in inverted commas, strategies to deal with that type of insurgency, which we've seen in West Papua, which has led to the death of over 500,000 people in the last 60 years. We have been sending arms to Saudi Arabia for decades. It was the previous government's intention to make Australia a great arms exporting industry. That's right. Arms exporting industry. I mean, where's the expose of what's been going on in West Papua? It never seems to hit the headlines. It's like public housing. Never seems to hit the headlines. Never seems to hit the headlines. I don't understand. And that's why we have the same issues week in, week out, month in, month out, year in, year out, decade in, decade out. If you picked up an old paper or had a look at an old paper on the net, you'd see the same issues cropping up time and time and time and time again. Yeah, because you hear it on the radio, it doesn't mean the problem is fixed. For example, currently, it's very difficult to make any contact with any government department. Very difficult. Currently, it's all about digital IDs. The list goes on and on. So, as I said before, if you want change, you need to be involved. I don't particularly care what you're involved in. Well, as long as it's positive, obviously. But the key is to sit back and watch and wait and watch and wait for the right things to be done. Doesn't work. Working up the right channels, as I explained, regarding the Victorian government's corporatisation of the treaty process in the state of Victoria, does not work. Begging and beseeching does not work. The only thing that seems to work historically is people taking action and putting governments on notice. Governments at the state and federal level need to understand that they need to fear the public, the people they represent, more than the corporate sector. Because we have the capacity, the intelligence, the educational and the organisation to be able to create a different society, a society based on the satisfaction of real human needs, not manufactured human needs. Now, currently, a lot of people ask me, well, Joe, how come you got all this time? Well, I still do work part-time. I've got a little bit of extra time. I'll tell you, I've got a handy home hint. I'm going to try to do that's my specialty, giving unsolicited advice to people who are not interested in unsolicited advice, but it's my specialty. See, I don't waste my time scrolling. Up and down, scrolling, TikTok, YouTube, you name it. I don't waste my time. I know people who are spending 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, scrolling up and down, getting angry, having a stroke, tearing their hair out if they got any left. Because they scroll up and down, thinking somehow that this is going to change the world, that they're going to be able to change the world by liking this and liking that and looking at this and looking at that. The fact is, all these platforms are based on the private investment for private profit model. And you are the meat. That's right. It's your eyeballs on their advertising, irrespective of what the platform is, which makes a buck for them. So I'm not telling you not to delve into it occasionally, but I'm saying to you, what's the point? You'd have much more effect in your community of actually getting involved. I'll give you an example. Now, look, this doesn't really affect 99.99% of the listeners, but I'll just give you a small example. Now, I got a note today. That's right, people do write to me occasionally about a historic building in Beaconsfield, which is an outer Melbourne suburb, I think past Cranbourne up that way. And the Victorian state government, yes, my favourite government, has acquired a house that had been renovated, a historic home, which is kind of the centre of Beaconsfield, historic home and a historic tree. And they're going to demolish that historic home and that tree to put a giant overpass over the railway line. Now, those residents have options. They can forget about it and say, well, that's nice, that's progress. I'd like to have a big bridge over the railway line so I can walk over it. Or they can actually fight it. And obviously people are starting to organise to fight it. So they're not accepting it as a fait accompli. Because the house has been compulsorily acquired, it was owned privately. It could now be used, if the resistance is strong enough, as some type of community hub or historic building or whatever. So that's just one little thing in one little corner of this great country, this huge country. Think about it. Why waste your time scrolling up and down when you can actually be involved in local activity? Now, the last thing, I know it doesn't help, but I would like to send my condolences to all those people that have been affected by floods recently. And I did the same during the fires, and the list goes on and on. But the fact is, this country does not have an adequate disaster management plan. And I'll mention once again, what we need is 50 regional and urban disaster centres which are publicly owned, which are ready to respond to disasters in their particular region. The climate emergency is real, and if we don't actually organise a public response to ongoing climate emergencies, the pictures you see currently will continue to be a feature, and we will see climate refugees from our own country. You've been listening to The Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. My name is Joseph Toscano. As I said at the beginning of the program, if you're interested in assisting us with our finances regarding broadcasting, give us a ring on 0439 395 489. If you're interested in going to the Tunnerminnerwait Maulboyheenner Commemoration, go to the website tunnermall.org, Tunner, T-U-N-N-E-N, maulb.org, but come along on the 20th of January, that's midday sharp. If you'd like to leave a number, if you'd like to phone me and leave a message, 0439 395 489. YouTube, public interest before corporate interests. You can write to us. That's right, I do receive letters. Not many, but we still do. Post Office Box 20, Parkville 3052. And if you want to join public interest before corporate interests, pipsy.net. And don't forget, dinner at La Boqueta. One last thing. I'm interested in doing public lectures on Australian radical history. So if you know of a pub somewhere in the CBD or outside the CBD with a spare room that's free, I'd like to do a lecture once a month regarding Australia's radical history, because if we don't talk about it, nobody else will. Thank you once again for listening to The Anarchist World this week on your local community radio station, courtesy of the Community Radio Network. This program has been coming to you from the studios of 3CR in Melbourne. I'd like to thank Kelly for coming back to make this show a reality, because without her, I'm nothing, because I don't know how to push buttons. Just can't do it. Can't do it. I've got an allergy to them. Thank you once again for listening to The Anarchist World this week on your local community radio station. Listen in next week, courtesy of the Community Radio Network. That phone number, 0439 395 489. You can email info@pipsy.net, info@anarchistmedia.org, you name it, YouTube, public interest before corporate interest. We've got all the things, but don't scroll your life away. Listen to the Anarchist World this week, next week.
Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction.
An analysis you'll never hear anywhere else. Anarchist World this week. Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. 10 a.m. every Wednesday. Listen to the Anarchist World this week for an up-to-date analysis of local, national and international events.
Poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh, Lord, yeah.